So let's get reactions straight away from Texas Senator Ted Cruz, member of the Rules Committee. He'll be in the hearing today. Senator, good morning to you. Now, you got a lot to say about this. I guess as a preface to the argument here, the filibuster is still intact. And also you got this question about states' rights and whether or not this could become a court issue, ultimately the U.S. Supreme Court. I mean, that's where this could go. Now, how do you see this debate playing out today? Let's begin there.
Well, Bill, I think this is the single most dangerous piece of legislation before the United States Congress. You know, if you look at this radical Democratic majority, they have really two sets of priorities. One is bad policy, things like very high taxes, very high regulations, open borders. They're pushing that on every front. But the second and their broader objective is to rig the system. And they have a whole bunch of dramatic reforms designed to stay in power forever. Things like adding the District of Columbia as a state so they get 2 more Democratic senators. Things like packing the U.S. Supreme Court to add 4 left-wing justices. And things like this bill. It's S1. It's the #1 bill Chuck Schumer has as a priority in the Senate. Many of us are calling it the Corrupt Politicians Act because what it does is it federalizes elections and it strikes down virtually every voter integrity law that has been adopted at the state level. For example, 29 states require identification to vote, a common sense position that over 70% of Americans support. What does the Corrupt Politicians Act do? It repeals every one of those laws and strikes them down. Likewise, 31 states prohibit ballot harvesting, the corrupt practice of paying operatives to collect other people's votes. And the reason it is prohibited in 31 states is because it is repeatedly lent itself to fraud as unscrupulous operatives throw away votes they don't like. What does the Corrupt Politicians Act do? It strikes down every one of those and mandates ballot harvesting all across this country. This bill would automatically register millions of illegal aliens to vote and millions of felons, millions of criminals to vote. And the reason the Democrats want to do it is that they believe, reasonably I think, that millions of illegal aliens and millions of felons voting are likely to vote Democrat, and their objective is to rig the game and stay in power for the next 100 years and to take the power away from the American voters.
Senator, there's a map. We have a map of the states that have already passed voting rights legislation, from Arizona and Arkansas all the way to Montana, Utah, Wyoming. You can see them there on the board. Your critics would say that many of these states are passing these bills because of false accusations of voter fraud from the 2020 election that are continuing to be perpetuated, and that the Democrats would say we have to do this at the federal level because they have to try to protect the election somehow. That's their position. How do you respond to that? Because it feels like until that issue is resolved, this debate is going to rage.
Well, look, I think it is a strange talking point that the Democrats have adopted and that the corrupt media has adopted that says voter fraud doesn't exist. It's strange because voter fraud has existed since the beginning of our country. Anyone remember Duval County in Texas and LBJ and suddenly the missing ballot box and dead people voting? This has been a problem over and over and over again. Anyone remember Cook County and JFK in 1960? This has been a problem for 200 years. And it's not just me saying it. It's the United States Supreme Court, 6-3, in the decision upholding Indiana's voter ID law, a law that I helped defend on behalf of a number of states, and we won 6-3. The Supreme Court said voter fraud is a persistent problem that has occurred over and over again. But Democrats have adopted the bizarre talking point that is essentially ostrich, stick your head in the sand, it doesn't exist, but it's even worse than that. So the last major bipartisan examination of voter fraud was a commission called the Carter-Baker Commission. It was chaired by Democratic President Jimmy Carter and Republican Secretary of State James Baker. The Carter-Baker Commission concluded rightly that voter fraud is a serious and persistent problem that has changed the outcome in numerous elections. It recommended a whole host of reforms to prevent voter fraud, things like requiring photo ID. What does the Corrupt Politicians Act do? It literally does the opposite of the recommendations from the Carter-Baker Commission. In fact, it takes the areas where the Carter-Baker Commission said are most likely to cause fraud, things like mail-in voting, things like ballot harvesting, and it mandates them universally. And Dana, I operate from the assumption that people intend the natural consequences of what they do. In this instance, the Democrats intend there to be substantially more voter fraud because they believe voter fraud benefits them in elections.
It sounds like a grand debate. It's hard to see how it becomes law under the current construct, but we shall see. And I don't
well,
think
it all depends on the filibuster. It all depends on the filibuster and whether Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema hold the line.
Got it.
There are 48 Democrats willing to end the filibuster. If Manchin and Sinema fold, they will pass the Corrupt Politician Act, and it's designed to prevent the voters from being able to vote out Chuck Schumer or Nancy Pelosi for the next 100 years.
Okay. Senator, we're out of time, but we appreciate yours. That debate begins 10 a.m. By the way, Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell are going to participate, which isn't so common. Senator, thank you for coming on today.